to another installment of the Philip K. Dick Festival, Philip K. Dick Talks. Welcome to all those who are joining me today for another talk on Philip K. Dick, his Gnostic work, the work that he did that he's not as well known as some of his earlier writings. My name is Dan. I'm Dan Abella. I'm the organizer of the Philip K. Dick Film Festival. And I wanted to really start a series moving forward on exploring the more esoteric components of Philip K. Dick and other authors. So the name of this series is going to be calling Escape the Matrix. And this will become very clear in a short while. A lot of people, many of you probably are seeing or familiar with the works of Philip K. Dick. At the very least, you've probably seen some of his movies or adaptations. These include Minority Report, Blade Runner. Here you go. Let's see here. In addition to Blade Runner, we also have Adjustment Bureau. In addition to Adjustment Bureau, we have other films as well. These include more recently Radio Free Albemuth, which we premiered many years ago at the season 1 of the Philip K. Dick Film Festival. But for those of you who are not familiar with his literary writings, he wrote 121 short stories and 44 novels during his time. So the result of his frenetic writing created a kind of an interesting, almost stream of consciousness quality to his writing. His writing does not follow the same structural grammar as other sci-fi writers such as Heinlein, Bradbury, or Arthur C. Clarke. It's almost like a feverish pitch. Now, Philip K. Dick always called himself a fictionalizing philosopher. So his idea was not just to write science fiction for the heck of it, but he found science fiction a good framework to transmit his more esoteric ideas. Now, many people are familiar with his early writings: Maze of Death, Man in the High Castle, Palmer Eldritch, and so on. And not so many are familiar with his more esoteric writings, which started after his mystical experience in 2374. These include VALIS, Divine Invasion, and the Transmigration of Timothy Archer. Now, there are some people, some Philip K. Dick heads, who think that Philip K. Dick only, the real Philip K. Dick, was in his early writings. And that what happened after 2374 is just not, they don't care for it. But I would argue to say that, in fact, a lot of his later writings crystallized a lot of the same concepts that he was thinking about early in his career. The idea of multiple universes, such as in the case of the Man in the High Castle. The idea of an evil, demonic demiurge, as in the case of the three stigmata of Palmer Eldritch. These ideas were circulating in his mind. And I believe as a result of his mystical experience, they became crystallized in a much more esoteric, theological approach. So the whole idea of this series is perhaps to develop a better appreciation for what he's communicating to us. See, a lot of sci-fi writers many of them focus on space operas, what the world's going to be like, let's say, 2,000 or 3,000 years from now. And many of them focus on heavy effects and heavy forms of dialogue. So Philip K. Dick, although some of his writings do sometimes are otherworldly, a lot of it focus on what would happen in planet Earth a few years, maybe a few decades from now. Now, for those who are not aware, a lot of his films have already become almost a reality. That's what's so scary about what's going on. Take the example of the film Minority Report, which starred Tom Cruise back in about 20 years ago, and it features a group, a futuristic group of pre-crime units that profile criminals using the help of the precogs. They're able to track down and stop criminals before they actually commit the crime. Now, if you haven't checked the news recently, that's a heavy profiling and pre-crime activities already taking place in some states around in the U.S. That you're looking at the data, the information that's gathered, and they assess using AI, which we'll get to in a little while, what are the chances this person or such a person is going to commit a crime, and they essentially are waiting there for him or her to commit the crime when it happens. So this is where we're heading. Heavy data surveillance society. And there's no reason, and there's a good reason for Philip K. Dick to be paranoid at that time, because similar to what's going on now, there was sort of an oppressive regime, and he got this sense that we were heading towards a really bad place. In spite of that, though, in his writings, he does leave an opening for people to thrive and to live with dignity in such a space. So collectively, we may not be heading towards a great utopian vision, unlike what the WEF and the Great Reset is telling us. But individually, we still can save ourselves from the incoming chaos that is growing day by day. Now, in Philip K. Dick, we have this assessment that he, by his own admission, said that reality always seems to be a bit unstable. And clearly that's reflected in his own writings. What is the nature of reality? What are the narratives that impact us? In fact, back in 1963, following a marital dispute with his wife, and he was walking down the street, then he looked up at the sky and he sees this evil mechanical grin, and he was terrified. In fact, he thought that he had seen the face of Satan. Now, he immediately rushes to his friend Bishop Pike. Here you go, it's Bishop Pike, who explains to Philip K. Dick that what he had seen is a kind of a reflection of Satan or some kind of demonic entity. So this never really left his thinking. And in fact, he followed up that with he's followed this experience with a book called The Three Stigmata of Palmer Eldritch. It's interesting, if you look at in his writings, one of the drugs that are used to kind of confuse people is called Can-D. First of all, at that time, names like sounded ridiculous, but yet, if you really start listening or hearing what a lot of startups and the kind of names they're using, they're kind of reminiscent of that, isn't it? Kind of like cutesy, kind of very informal kind of, and in fact, it turns out to be a very powerful drug. So there's no doubt that Philip, he had the finger on the pulse of what was happening. He wasn't just a madman pumped up on amphetamines, or just someone who was just rambling on. Even though his personality did have some quirks, he had some phobias. Overall, that didn't stop him from really seeing into the future. In fact, some people would argue that that's what helped him see the future, kind of be able to tap into the larger stream of consciousness that exists out there. Eric Davis, who was a very famous writer, who's written Technosis and high weirdness, says the following about Philip K. Dick. He says, this, with his writings, like the three stigmata, they represent not only a psychic contribution whose work is psychedelic, but a work that functions like a drug. Now, that I actually had that same experience years ago when I was reading Ubik. And after the first few pages of reading Ubik, I started feeling very disoriented. I said, what's going on? And I started looking at the assemblage of the words that within Ubik. And it pretty much dawned upon me that this was intentional. He was not just a poor editing or poor grammar on his part, but it was a kind of a psychedelic stream of consciousness. That's why in my book, I kind of see him as the James Joyce of science fiction. And maybe the result of that stream of consciousness came from the fact that he was being paid pennies on the dollar. I mean, pennies per word. And that, of course, caused a lot of stress. And unfortunately, most of his life, except for the last year and a half, he was a very poor man. Now, why his writings are so important today? And I'm going to speak from moving forward from a literary, or I would say a creative perspective, not so much a philosophical. I mean, I have some ideas, and there are plenty of other well-known writers that have spoken about on his philosophy, but the creative. And I think that for a lot of us who are in films or in the creative world, whether writing or script writing or films, it's important what he had to say. Now, after his 2374 experience, it's March 2nd, 1974, for those who are not familiar, Philip K. Dick was recovering from an impacted tooth, and he was waiting for the pharmacist to appear, or at least the representative with a painkiller. He opens the door, and there she is, and he looks at a pendant of the fish, and from that, a pink beam comes out, hits him on the forehead, knocking him down. Now, the story goes that afterwards he felt for a short period of time, he was still in first century Rome around 70 AD. And after he began to slowly recover from this experience, it was so powerful that for the rest of his life, he figured out what is going on, what just happened to me. It kind of reminds me, for those who are familiar with Thomas Aquinas, the religious Christian mystic who was writing Summa Theologica. And he had a mystical experience. And after having a mystical experience, he stopped writing because he says what I just had, the experience I had just had, makes all my writing completely secondary. And I think Philip K. Dick felt the same way. However, he still chose the word as a way of explaining what just happened to him. And to his credit, he then became a dogmatist, thinking, I had a vision of God, and God is telling me to do this, to do that. He always kept asking, what is the nature of this experience? At some moments, he did maybe thought he had a psychotic breakdown. At other moments, he felt perhaps it was the excessive use of amphetamines, or maybe some sort of nervous disorder. But more and more over the period of time from 1974 to his death in 1982, he came to come together and form a kind of a system of an understanding of this reality, which was independent of the experience he had, of this somatic experience. He felt that reality was in fact relevant to what was happening in the world. Now, mind you, in the first few years, he's not sure where. If you read his book, and he wrote down notes, and which later became the Exegesis, over 10,000 pages long. Here it is for those who are never seen it. It's like the Bible of Philip K. Dick. There you go. It's about 900 pages. And by the way, this is not this is the abridged, edited version. They're actually it's almost more than 10,000 pages. So from 1974 to like 1981, here he's talking about his experience. And a lot of writers in recent years have come to the conclusion that Philip K. Dick was a Gnostic. Now, I want to make a distinction between Gnosis and Gnosticism, or Gnostic. So the Gnostics were an early heretical Christian cult who believed that really Christ, first of all, had not died on the cross, that the man on the cross was someone else, and that the world was created by an evil demiurge. Some call it Yaldabaoth, or some call it Samuel, but basically someone who did not have our best interests in mind. And the real God was this kind of transcendent entity that existed outside the seven planetary spheres. So the goal of the Gnostics, so it was a Manichaean or dualistic system. So the goal of the Gnostics was essentially to climb up these planetary spheres. Each planet, starting with Mercury, Sun, all the way to Saturn, represent different influences, and they run by archons. These kind of demonic entities that, again, they're not into, they want to keep man down, or man or women down. So the goal is to rise up these archons until they're able to break away out of this kind of a esoteric solar system into the real God, whom they call Amor. So a lot of writers have said, "Oh, Philip K. Dick was a Gnostic. He believed in Gnosticism." And I would argue to say that especially in the early days, that might be so. That at one point he was talking about the demiurge, this evil demonic entity. But later on in his writings, as I will show you very shortly, he actually is, if I can find the book, he actually is not thinking along those lines. I'm sorry, we seem to have lost. Okay, sorry about that. We seem to have. He wasn't thinking along those lines. He felt that there was a more a better understanding of how this happened. In his book or short manuscript, Cosmology and Cosmogony, which was written in 1978, he comes up with a system, a framework that sort of explains away what's going on, and it is basically it is the following: that the objective absolute reality is called the ergon. URGRUND. That's the absolute objective reality. That is the absolute. But the ergon, attempting to understand himself, created a simulation, created a kind of projection system that Philip K. Dick calls Zebra. Now, Zebra basically projects the information to the world, projects and creates the world. And this is a way by the ergon, what I refer to the absolute reality, to understand himself. Incidentally, this is a kind of thinking that other writers, Meister Eckhart and Jacob Boehm, talked about. They actually use the same word, ergon. URGRUND. It means the foundation of reality. So in his system, Philip K. Dick believes that at some point, the ergon started to connect directly with humans and did not need this this projector, whom Philip K. Dick calls Zebra. But by that point, this projector had taken over. He calls it a simulation. He had essentially created a counterfeit reality. Now, back in 1977, Philip K. Dick, for those, and this is on YouTube, speaks about this. He believes that we are living in a computer-generated reality. That was before the Matrix. He believes that the reality that we experience every day is not the reality of the absolute, but is a simulation. Now, a lot of scientists today, including Neil Tyson, have argued that, in fact, that might very well be the case. This is, again, another example where Philip K. Dick's thinking it's becoming real. That is, it's almost like we've entered into a Philip K. Dick universe. So what is the Matrix? What is this counterfeit creation? Now, I'm not, for the purpose of our work, I'm not going to so much spend time on the ontological basis, whether or not We actually battery cells being psychically drained by these machines. But understand this, and this he mentions very much in his work, that the VALIS, the zebra projection, creates copies of itself. So let's look at what's happening in the world today. I think since 2015 or 2016, there's been a kind of a collapse of all the narratives. Now, some people will blame it on the usual suspects, but I'm not going to go into details about this. But I believe it goes beyond political. I think what we're seeing is a complete fragmentation of narratives. For instance, we speak about the UFO concept, which 10, 20, 30 years ago, people would have laughed at. This is ridiculous. This is tinfoil hat. And yet now, at least the Pentagon ostensibly is considering the possibility that there may be some sort of otherworldly creation. Think about the absurdity of that. On the other, we talk about AI. And now everybody loves AI. Everybody's talking about ChatGPT or OpenAI. In fact, that's been one of the main talks that's boosting the stock market. AI. All these things represent that fragmentation of the narratives that we will continue to experience over the couple years. So this is the thing where I want to continue to focus on. So what are these narratives? Some of them say one thing and yet you're experiencing another. For instance, some of us are being told that the unemployment rate is about 3%. So there are plenty of jobs. And yet, I'm sure you run into people who can't find jobs. So where is this disconnect, this dissonance is happening on all levels. Everywhere you turn, you have scams. You have all sorts of dissimulation and confusion. It's almost like this virus, which existed 20, 30 years ago, has just really blown out of proportion. And I would argue that it's just going to get worse. These narratives will continue to cascade and splitting into various different angles. So what do you do with it? How do you deal with these narratives? I mean, and that's really, I think, for those who are in the world, the literary world, and the creative world, it's very important. How do you deal with this from a humanistic existential point of view? Do you just embrace it? Do you run away? Now, I'm looking for this book, which seems to have mysteriously disappeared. Maybe Philip K. Dick ran with it. Okay, I have it right here. This is, by the way, another book that I would recommend. By the way, I have two displays here. This is why I'm looking in different directions, guys. It's called Philip K. Dick, The Selected Literary and Philosophical Writings. And here on page 281, get it here, if those can see it, is Cosmology and Cosmogony. Very interesting, because he writes this at the end of 1978. So he had about 5 years to kind of integrate these various mystical experiences. And here he talks about that. For instance, I'll just read you a couple of sections so you get a sense of what he's referring to. As to our reality being a projected framework, it appears to be but a projection by an artifact, that is Zebra, a computer-like teaching machine that guides, programs, and controls us as we act without awareness of it within our projected world. The artifact, which I call Zebra, has created, or actually projected, out reality as a sort of mirror of its maker. The maker is Ergron, is the absolute reality. Now, in this book, and this is a short book, it's a short essay, he's not sure whether or not Zebra is evil or not. In fact, at one point, he's actually arguing against the dualism, the Manichaeism that some writers have thought that Philip K. Dick was advocating, kind of a Gnostic good and evil world. He says, in this system, man is not accused of causing creation to fall. Although intricate, this model successfully employs a principle of parsimony. Most important, it seems to fit the facts, which is the empirical world is not quite real, but only seemingly real. The creator cannot be appealed for a rectification and redress of these evils. These evils are created by the projector, by zebra. The world's moving towards some kind of end state or goal, the nature of which is obscure, but the evolutionary aspect of the change suggests a good and purposeful end state, which has been designed by a sentient and benign proto-entity. Now, mind you, the wording is certainly more scientific, and Philip K. Dick is one who talks about our creator or God, whatever you higher source. But nevertheless, he's basically hinting or borrowing from the traditionalist or perennial Sophia Perennis tradition. At the root of that is this idea that all the revealed religions, whether it be Taoism, Judaism, Zoroastrianism, Vedanta, some aspects of some Native American, like the Lakota, they also speak of the same reality, but they have different words and different practices to approach that reality. Sufism, Islam. So they all basically are connecting, or they're referring back to the fundamental reality which exists out there. But how we approach it, it varies from system to system and the practices. That's why some people would argue that in order to really reap the full benefits of these revealed religions, you need to go all the way. You can't just one day I'm going to become I'm going to go to temple, another day I'm going to go to mosque, another day I'm going to go to church, another day I'm going to be a Buddhist, and so on. It won't get you anywhere. Just like a karate expert, someone who's studying martial arts, really the best thing is just get that mastery, and then when you're at that mastery level, you start to appreciate other arts as well. They're all connected. So I think the same thing works that way. Going back to Philip K. Dick, he essentially is advocating for an understanding that we're living in a counterfeit reality. That is a world, not so much, okay, here, this table is real. No doubt about that. I don't think he's quite saying that, but he's saying that there's something else going on. And I think for our purposes is, how do you deal with the counterfeit narratives? Now, some people out there, I'm sure some of you are familiar with the idea of martyrs or the idea of political figures. And sure enough, whenever someone speaks the truth, whether it be political or scientific, usually that person is dealt with by the system. It's not accepted. He's dealt with by the system, whether it be a political, scientific, or a cultural. At first, he's ignored. Then he's criticized and dealt with. If he survives, then he's accepted. Whether it be, think of Copernicus, think of Galileo, think of all the martyrs and all the religious persecuted, Martin Luther King. So what it is this: if you decide to become that person, understand that they're going to come after you. Understand that they will single you out, especially if you're promoting the truth, or what a kind of a truth that truly inspires the world, that lets the world break out of this counterfeit creation. They will do that. It's almost like Jung would say that then the collective, the shadow of the whole collective now is projected on this one person. So they got to go after this person. So one way is to accept the idea that you will be a martyr. Like Martin Luther King would talk about that. He understood that, there was a good chance that we're going to take him out, but it still was his mission. So I think a lot of people may not be quite comfortable with that position. Says, well, I'm not quite ready to die. But what should I do? How can I still get us out of the counterfeit creation? And that would be one concept. Well, how do you do it? Well, what Philip K. Dick talks about is the following. He says this is an antivirus which blocks reception but substitute reality for the simulation. And in Divine Invasion, which is one of the books, one of the characters mentions, sometimes I think that we're in a weird kind of trance. He talks about the virus as a kind of a vampire. We are sources of psychic energy. And he talks about this in the exegesis. So this is why you understand why the Matrix resonated with so many people. The more we fight the system, the more it sucks our energy. The more angry we get, the more it uses that energy against us. So one way, which Philip K. Dick advocates, you got to just renounce the world, which is what a lot of the teachings say. Another way, though, is this: to counterfeit the counterfeit, which is this. The Matrix has had a lot of impact with many people, and many people think it's just entertainment. But there are those who really feel that it's more than just entertainment. It's actually a commentary on the reality we're living in, not necessarily that we are currently just embryos being, providing energy to just batteries for these machines, but there's something else going on. So the Matrix is an example of counterfeiting the counterfeit. Within the literary framework, what you do, you throw truth inside that. It's almost like the viral model right now. When we have a dead virus, but inside that virus, we throw something there that is going to come in and provide the seed, the germination for the development of the awareness of that. That's why a lot of tyrants throughout history, the first thing they do is they get rid of poets, they get rid of artists, they marginalize them, because they know very well that through their writing, they can wake people up to the reality of the world without writing a philosophical or historical or polemic. That the writing itself, the creative impulse, carries the seed for the revolution. And that's one thing we could all consider as filmmakers or as writers, as creative people, to do that. Now, a lot of people, though, today, unfortunately, part of the preemptive agenda of where we live is that everybody's an artist, everybody's a writer, DIY. But you got to ask yourself, why am I doing this? Is there a story I want to tell the world? Is there a kind of an awakening moment that I feel others will appreciate? Not like, oh, well, I'm going to make a short, I'm going to direct a movie, I'm going to submit it to such and such a festival, and that's that. And I'll make some money, maybe then of course, that's not the point. The point is, you almost got to return back to the auteur. You want to tell the story which others will resonate with, others will understand. That's the key. Not so much, I'm going to try to make $1 million on this, which may or may not happen, but the goal should be, A, to tell a story so you connect with your people, with your tribe, with your element, and 2, as a creative expression of who you are. Philip K. Dick believed that was one way to escape the Matrix, to basically become an authentic writer, or say, whether it be science fiction or drama, that really gets the word out. Now, what a lot of filmmakers, and unfortunately have done, is that they actually pigtail on the postmodernist theme these days. So they add a lot of cynicism, a lot of irony, a lot of skepticism, a lot of relativism. But guess what? We already have tons of that. We don't need more. If you really believe in anything of what Philip K. Dick was talking about, you understand there's an objective reality out there. Not the one that's created by the media, but an objective ontological reality that transcends this world of illusions. And it doesn't matter what your faith is. All the revealed religions speak of the same thing. There's a reason why they do that. And even if in your heart of hearts you believe there is a transcendent, objective world out there, as a filmmaker, that's where you want to go. Because if you're just sprinkling your stories with a lot of cynicism, hipsterism, and non-earnest kind of formalisms, then you're just contributing to what's already happening. For instance, what troubles me right now is I've heard some filmmakers say, yeah, I'm gonna write my next script using AI, ChatGPT. I think that would be a big mistake. First of all, a lot of the stuff that's coming out of ChatGPT is very bland, not necessarily that good. It kind of organizes, but you got to really humanize it. And second is, then why are you writing? Why are you doing this? If your goal is to make money, then there are other ways of making money. The whole point of an artist is to understand the nature of the creation. And that creation is like a seed, is a kind of a resistance movement against the matrix. This is how you fight it. They won't know where it came from. And they'll think, we can always say, well, this is just fiction. What do you mean? That's why Philip K. Dick chose, one of the reasons also a lot of his writing was fiction. He could have written another book on philosophy. Who would have read it? Who would have been impacted by it? But instead, by choosing fiction, he was able to bypass, go underground through the resistance, in a resistance movement, and start waking people up to what is happening. Believe me, whether or not you agree or not, the powers that be are using this AI right now to increase surveillance. That's their goal, right? And there are plenty of sources that indicate that. Take, for example, Facebook, which actually we're using right now. But when Facebook was originally designed, it was designed to create these kind of dopamine spikes. So it's not done by accident. I remember when Mark Zuckerberg had Facebook before it went IPO, he had billions and billions of dollars already. And I was asking myself, how is this even possible? It's yet to prove itself. Well, I think the story was they realized that data was going to be the new oil, private data on people, who they are, what they do, so on. And that's why it was already had a very high valuation. So back to the issue of a writer and a filmmaker, the key thing is to keep creating, keep getting the word out. And ideally, if you feel there's a certain truth out there that all of us can share on, then get it out through your writing, through the fiction, through the films. That's really the way we keep the resistance. That's why we push back against the forces of the counterfeit creation. It's not about just saying how cool you are. Oh, yeah, we live in a matrix. And of course, let's assume this is happening. So how do you deal with it? And there, again, Philip K. Dick suggests that one way is to renounce the world, become an ascetic, become like one of the early fathers. Just go out there in the wilderness. But he also said there was another way, which was the way was to engage others. So by awakening people to the counterfeit creation, it's not just you who's escaping. Others will escape too. And that's very important because he felt we all in it together. We all in on it together. Not just me, I'm going to seek my own personal enlightenment and to hell with the world. See, yeah, basically by doing so, by taking that position, you're only intensifying the counterfeit creation. But by saying, no, what I do is I'm going to see where I can share this information with others, whether it be a film or a documentary, that others will then take and that will plant the seed of their own awakening. So you're not just helping yourself, you're helping others by helping yourself. So by helping yourself, you're helping others. And this is really one of the reasons that inspire me to organize the festival. Even though a lot of the actual works of Philip K. Dick have been are copywritten and owned by the estate, I felt there were a lot of filmmakers out there who believe that Philip K. Dick speaks of a specific mindset that's very important. And since in the last 11 years that we've been doing our festival, it's become more and more obvious that we are living in a Philip K. Dick universe, as if we're living in a Philip K. Dick universe. And again, in his writings, he says you can't become. A lot of the characters in his writing are just everyday people. They're not superheroes or celebrities or no, but they're able to resist or push back on what Philip K. called the counterfeit creation, or he also refers to it as the black iron prison. So we don't need to literalize a black iron prison as saying it's a prison itself, but it's a kind of a prison. It's a kind of an oppressive feeling. So the temptation is to literalize everything he's saying. Reality. Well, what do you mean? This is real. This war is this is real. This computer is real. He's not talking about that. He's talking about a hermeneutical approach to take all our concepts and begin to question and look at various alternatives. And all these traditions have spoken about that over the years. So the sin is the sin of literalization, the believing this is it, this is all there is. That's the problem. So there are various ways of interpreting a particular phenomena. And how do you handle it? Well, one thing I want to keep on insisting is the idea is use your creative energy to get yourself and others out of this black iron prison. And not just, I'm going to make it for a couple of bucks, because everybody's doing it. See, that's the thing. A lot of filmmakers, we're getting many filmmakers. Some of them are really good films, and we never see anything that comes of it. So if you're just doing a film or writing a book just because you're going to make a lot of money, I think you picked the wrong field. This field's by those who really believe that their work will impact others and that will transform those and that will change them. Just remember, you are the resistance. You are part of the resistance. And if your goal is to wake people up to the nonsense, this information that's happening, then your goal is to really be part of a creative current that gets people to appreciate that and wake them up. Understand, many of you are awakened. The fact you're watching this channel, but there are many who are asleep at the wheel. So you're wondering why the world is what it is, because I think that the disinformation matrix, that the information bomb that Philip K. Dick talks about is grown out of proportion. So if you look at what's happening all over the world, whether it be in the U.S. or in Europe and China, many people strongly disagree with what's happening, what the so-called leaders are doing. But there's very little pushback. And when there is pushback, leaders take notice. Notice that. And that's the important thing to remember, that collectively, if something is happening, with some decree or some kind of law is being, we need to push back. And understand that a lot of this confusion, especially since the pandemic, that has been that people have about the world where we're heading, a lot of it was intentionally created, or at least leveraged by the confusion. It's no doubt. During the day, I actually am a consultant. I work with some people who have psychological problems, and I was speaking to a psychiatrist about a year or so ago, and she says most people still living in a kind of a PTSD state. So understand that a lot of the reactions that people are making, a lot of these extremely polar, black and white judgments they're making of others, result from their PTSD state, and very little is being done about that. But the government knows that that's happening. So social engineering is happening. And Philip K. Dick was very well aware of social engineering. That's why he was so paranoid, because he understood how the government is always trying to control. But the key is the powers, and we have the power. We can push back. You can elect a leader, which will be probably martyred, or collectively we can individually take our initiative and start creating things that awaken people to another possibility, another alternative. And that's really the message of Philip K. Dick in a nutshell. It's not just about, and of course he talks about the powers that exist in our mind. What concerns me is that more and more people are thinking that without their phone or without their computer, their brain is just like worthless. But one of the reasons we've had workshops and panels in the past, including remote viewing, as well as things like time travel, is the mind is still an unexplored dimension. So I would not give up on your mind so easily or so quickly. Understand that you have these powers. You just got to develop them. All the traditions talk about them, all of them, whether it be the prophetic dreams of the Old Testament or the gifts or the siddhis of the Hindus. They all talk about that. Remote viewing is an example. I would say that reality is kind of Phildikian. That's my interpretation. It can be subject to natural laws, but there are certain things that don't seem to apply. And when you start looking at the world in a Phildikian way, it opens up possibilities. For instance, I had Ronald Mallard recently, a couple of years back, and we might have him back at our festival. And he's a someone who's spoken on time travel. Now, a lot of people automatically, especially the physicists, his contemporaries. By the way, he's a professor emeritus at UConn. Would say, now, the amount of energy in the universe is not enough in a galaxy not to send one particle back in time. But he says something very interesting. He says, we're talking about an engineering problem. We're not talking about breaking the laws of physics, but it's an engineering problem. And there's still things that we can discover, or will discover in the future, that will enable us to use or do time travel without, theoretically, without all this energy. It's an engineering issue. It's not necessarily we're violating these laws. But here's someone like, he's definitely against the mainstream. And a lot of them say, no, he doesn't know what he's talking about, and so on. But you got to have that open attitude, because when you do that, when you approach things in a Phildikian way, then things open up to you. Miracles begin to happen. And that's really the key to who we are as human beings. And that's really where we are. Where we are, yes. Total Recall. I'm just looking at some of the. I'm looking at some of the comments. An artist is versatile. Yes, we live in a world of lies. That is correct. Yes. Okay. So here we are. I'm gonna be showing to some of you. Okay, Philip K. Dick, Philosophical Writings. Lawrence Sutton. I really recommend you guys pick up this one. Lawrence, again, I'm going to make it nice and close. There you go. Lawrence Sutton. He talks about that. So it's very good to know that Philip K. is not just a sci-fi writer. That's why I began reading his trilogy, his mystical trilogy, and went backwards. Oh, by the way, The Penultimate Truth is another book that he wrote in his early days. And it talks about it's a machine that's very reminiscent of ChatGPT. So I believe that Philip K. Dick, his blinkers were more open than most of us. That's why he's able to get this data, this transmission, whether you're calling it from VALIS, which stands for Vast Active Living Intelligence System, or the Ergon, or somewhere he got it. And that made him a writer ahead of his time. And that's why over the years, he's becoming more and more and more popular. And so there we have it. I've got to see if there are any more questions here. I want to make sure. Any more comments? No comments here. So there you have it. I would say the main takeaway is either you renounce the world, turn your back on the world, which, by the way, Kierkegaard, philosopher Soren Kierkegaard, talked about the same thing. And Martin Heidegger talked about the same thing. That basically there is the forgetfulness of experience, of life. We forget. But life offers us initiatory moments. We don't have to look out for any specific training. It's there if you know where to look for it. So one way is this. One way is a renunciation of all life. Just become a Vabagon or a mystic or a monk. The monastic life. That's one way. The other way, and I think that might resonate with more of you guys, is to continue your creative and nourish that creative impulse. Because only through that are you really authentic to yourself, really authentic. And not necessarily introduce elements of how much money I'm going to make, when I'm going to make it, because the minute you start doing it, you'll start contaminating the original impulse. And that's the key thing. Counterfeit the counterfeit, fake the fake, or counterfeit the counterfeit. And believe me that the projector or the zebra will not be able to interfere with that. They won't know how to fight it. And that's really the key. in moving forward. We really need to collectively and individually be able to keep pushing back on who we are and our ability to make a difference in this world. So that's why after all these years, I'm still very excited about Philip K. Dick. Not so much as, well, have you read all his 44 novels? Or, no, I haven't. But I've read enough to indicate we're dealing with a very different, almost like a latter-day prophet. Almost. Because he's telling us so much about the nature of reality. But he's not saying just, I'm the answer. He's saying there are answers out there. And they exist in all the traditional systems. Perennialism. So whether it be all these traditional systems have esoteric truths. So it would be Vedanta. Islam has Sufism. Judaism has Kabbalah. Buddhism you have esoteric Buddhism. You have within Greek Orthodox Christianity, you have these mystical teachings. So they all have it. They're all there. But we need to go out and reach out for it. They're not just going to be given to us in a silver platter. And we really need it more than that to nourish our soul. But what concerns me more and more today is this talk about downloading our consciousness into a computer, or at least the religion, quote unquote, of downloading our consciousness into a computer. And for those who have read enough, they realize that consciousness is not in the head, but it's in the field. And it's a religion because in this sense, they'll have you do things that are not on faith alone and not necessarily on experience. The one other book I want to recommend before I let you guys go is this book. I mentioned that in my, there you go, The Master and His Emissary. It's another very thick book, so make sure you have a good amount of time to read it. Here you go. The Master and His Emissary. Here the author is by Ian McGilchrist. Doctor, and also he's a philosopher, but also got his master, an MD in the UK. He argues that the right brain is really the source of inspiration, and it apprehends reality very differently from the left brain. Just the left brain is very analytical, mostly language based. So those are some language compositions. The right brain mostly analytical, sequential, time wise. And his book is The Emissary. And the master is the right brain. That's the more holistic appreciation of a reality. And one note is that the remote viewing experiments that were conducted back in the late 70s, when they did MRI scans of the participants, of the remote viewers, they found out there was very little left brain activity. Most of it was right brain. Mystical states, right brain. Chanting, right brain. Psychedelic experiences, right brain. What does that tell you? The left brain is very useful, but essentially it's very bossy, and it's to control. So part of any meditation, any kind of practice, even the Yi Jing, which Philip K. Dick talked about, is more of a right brain process. So part of any practice that we engage in should involve both hemispheres. So make sure if you're not doing this, think of doing something moving forward. If you're a writer, this will definitely help you with your ideas. Some meditation, some chanting, some prayer, some practice that is non-left brain, because that will help you in opening up the gates of more of creativity. And Philip K. Dick was doing that all the time. He was kind of a dabbler in these various traditions, but remember, that was in the early 70s. Now, 50 years later, we kind of understand what's going on a little bit more. So take advantage of this literature. Again, I want to mention The Master and His Emissary. And what has happened is a lot of the fragmentation that we're seeing this day and age has to do with the excessive use of the left brain. You see, the left brain is more about, it's always thinking about the future and about the past and all our traumas, all our stories. Whereas the right brain is very happy where it is in the present. And all these traditions speak about being in the present, about being in the moment, about wholeness. It's mostly because they're activating that right brain, or maybe you would call it the other brain or the other consciousness. Even Alfred North Whitehead in Process Philosophy talked about 2 types of consciousness. So when you start looking at that, you start thinking like Philip K. Dick. That's what I think he would want us all to do. That is, not just be focused in one area of because there are many connections between what's happening in physics and philosophy and film, in the literary world, in theology. They're all connected. And the key is to really become a kind of a sponge for all this information. This is real information that will begin to transform you, and start shunning all these opinion people, because it's, at the end of the day, you want to be able to develop that sense of connectivity. And one thing he talked about is he didn't quite, it wasn't as bad then as it is now, but this idea that we're specialists. But the generalists, there's still a room for a generalist in this world. We see connections from different disciplines. What's happening in physics and neuroanatomy and theology and philosophy, we're all part of that same. We use the same language. We all share the same nervous system. And that's what gets me going every day. I'm thinking about the possibilities out there. Start looking at reality as Phil Dickian. Because anomalous, weird, strange. Most of the time it's predictable, but every so often there's certain things that are out of the ordinary, out of anomalous, but embrace it, because then you're starting connecting to the mystery. And when we hold on to the mystery, then we really start to appreciate life much more intensely than just atoms or molecules or neurotransmitters, because that's what the left brain wants. But at the end, the left brain won't be happy. There's not enough money, not enough power that will keep the left brain happy, because it's all about acquisition. You got to get the right brain. You got to balance it out through these practices. And I think that's what Philip K. Dick was heading towards. I'm going to just finish up now with one last piece here. See this anymore? Okay, guys. Any more out there? Oh, yes. Just one last thing. And thank you all for staying. By the way, there he is. He's actually, that's Philip K. Dick in his, I think he's in his early 50s by then. And this is the same place where I went to when we did our festival back in 2019. There was the same room, the same is actually the same building. We did a festival, and we actually did our festival literally a block away from where he was living. That's kind of the front of his apartment building complex. So those who are here, yes, sir, this is apartment building. So guys, I want then thank you for participating. I'm please like this channel. We're trying to grow it. Please, both the YouTube and Facebook. We're really trying to get the word out. I will soon start working on some videos, that is animated videos and/or videos incorporating the same message in a more cinematic way, different pieces and movies. So we want to get the word out. We are the resistance, and that's the key thing to take away. We can help others awaken, and by that we awake ourselves. So again, thank you all for coming. Please, again, like our Facebook, like our YouTube, and I will see you soon. In about 2 weeks, I'm going to have, on February 13th, I'm going to have an interview. I'll be doing an interview with Paul Levy, who's written several books on this. And he actually talks about Philip K. Dick, but he also talks about Colin Wilson and other writers. And he talks about what he refers to as the Wetiko, this kind of counterfeit creation, how to fight it. So it should be a very interesting interview. And I'll send you all the information. I'll probably post it in a week or two on our Facebook. But stay in touch. Any comments, let us know. And hopefully you find this enjoyable. We're building a community. We want to get the word out. It's not just the movies, but the message, the philosophy, the attitude. And at the end of the day, that's really what counts. And I think that's where he would be honoring his legacy by doing that. Again, thank you all for coming. It's been great. And I will speak to you real soon. Bye-bye.